Hey everyone, welcome back. I think today is probably going to be a kind of low-key stream, but we're going to be continuing on with upgrading elm-html-test for elm-19. So let's pull up our to-do list of where we left off, and yeah, I think we're at a point where we basically just have some cleanup of the test suite. So I'm not really expecting much like any kind of significant debugging or exploration today. Hopefully it should all be pretty straightforward and just some straightforward cleanup of the remaining test suite. But I guess as always we will see how that goes. Yeah, and like always, welcome everybody who's in the chat. If you're watching live, feel free to ask questions either about stuff we're doing, about Elm in general, or if anybody's working on project of their own, whether it's Elm or web development or not, feel free to share about it in the chat. I'm always interested in hearing what other people are up to, and I'm sure other people in chat are interested in that also. So, all right, so I guess a quick summary for anybody new who's tuning in. So elm-html-test is the package in Elm that lets us write tests that inspect the HTML output of pages, essentially. So you can do assertions that say, like, expect that the rendered view has this particular content or has this particular HTML element in it. So Elm 0.19 was released, I guess it's been a little while now, maybe about 2 months ago. So elm-html-test is still one of the fairly heavily used packages that hasn't been upgraded for Elm 19. And if you've followed along in the past videos, and I think I'm slowly posting all the past streams up on YouTube if anyone wants to see some of the past stuff that we've worked through to get this far. You can find the link to my YouTube, I think, in my Twitch profile. If you go to my main Twitch page and scroll down, you can find the link there. But this has basically involved taking the elm-html-test package and then 2 other packages that supported it and merging those all into the new testing package for Elm 19, which is called Elm Explorations Test. And we have made pretty good progress. So in the past streams, we have gotten all the tests to compile from these other packages. We've gotten all the tests to pass, which involved kind of debugging the internal representation of the virtual DOM, which has changed somewhat notably in Elm 19. And then we had some other tests that we pulled in. Okay, and now we're on to fixing up one of the weird kind of hacky things we did to get these tests to pass. So the issue here is that the test suite for this package is kind of unusual because of some weird tricks we've had to do to test the testing package itself. So our tests in this project are set up in kind of an unusual way, which is different from the way you normally set up your tests in a normal Elm project. And that has meant that we've needed to expose some private modules that we don't want to publicly publish when we ultimately publish this new test package. But some of the tests have relied on these internal modules because of the way we've had to set up the tests. So I think our work today is mostly going to be working on these, where these are a couple of the modules that are part of this library that we don't want to expose publicly when we publish the package. So we need to go through and kind of refactor or rewrite or potentially remove and write other tests for the tests that depend on these private modules so that we don't have to expose them anymore. I guess an alternate approach we could be taking here is to change how our tests are set up in such a way that it would allow us to have some tests that directly test some of these private modules. But I think it's going to be better for the quality of the test suite here overall if we instead rewrite the tests to only test the public API of the package. So I don't know, maybe some of you are thinking that we could just try to fix the test setup so that we could directly test the private modules, but I think overall it's probably going to be less work. First of all, it'll be more straightforward work, and I think it'll be better for the test suite here overall if we just rewrite the tests that need these private modules to instead only test the public API. So I hope everybody's bought into that approach. If you have thoughts about that, feel free to mention in the chat. But with that, actually, I want to read through the future items. If we do finish this stuff, we have a few more things to do before we can actually finally publish this. Let's see. Okay, we need to make sure that the modules we do want exposed are exposed. I think that's already done, but that'll be quick if it's not. Okay, we want to refactor one of the internal representations due to a change in how the virtual DOM works. That should be a pretty straightforward refactoring, which might be kind of interesting, but shouldn't take too long. This is related to the styles. I'm not going to explain it in too much detail now, but these two actually we can probably do at the same time. Figure out how we can return a result. Okay, this might be a slightly bigger thing that we kind of might have to do some design work to change how the internals work. This, I think, was something we discovered in maybe the very first stream when we started working on this, so I have a better idea than I had that day of how we can fix this. But this will be hopefully a not too bad refactoring. And okay, this is kind of about the internals of virtual DOM. I have some more thoughts on that too, but there shouldn't be a lot to do here. And then just some cleanup work. Okay, cool. Sorry for not giving a lot of details about those, but I just wanted to run through the quick and get an idea for myself of what we might work on. But yeah, depending on how long refactoring some of these tests take, we may actually be able to get through all of this today, but I guess we'll see. We've run into some hard to deal with problems before on some of these streams. So, all right, let's jump into this. So our first task is going to be to find any tests that import this test HTML descendant module and basically rewrite the tests or move the tests in some way so that they don't need to directly depend on this anymore. So I think I'm going to start by just going to the exposed modules and actually, why don't we first start by running our tests and make sure everything is passing before we start doing stuff. Okay, great. And let's also check, just double check that we have pushed everything. Okay, great. I don't think anyone else has been working on this branch. But let's just pull to double check. Yeah, okay, looks great. So we are ready to go. All right, so let's remove this from the exposed modules, and we should have some test failures now. Great, okay, so descendant. We also had a to-do to rename this, so we can do that towards the end, but it's possible we might end up moving all these tests to another file, so I'm not going to do this first. Let's see. So I guess our first goal is to figure out what this file even is testing. It only exposes one top-level test, so everything's defined in here. Looks like there's 4 tests. There are tests about the contains assertion. Returns true if it contains the expected HTML once. Okay, so it's talking about contains, but I don't see contains referenced in here anywhere. So what does this do? A single descendant in HTML. So HTML is a div. A single descendant is presumably some HTML. Where is this defined? Okay, so this is a header with some text in it. Straightforward enough. I feel like that's almost simple enough that it should maybe be inlined. And then wrapper looks like it returns a bool. What does wrapper do? Wrapper takes some HTML and a potential descendant and calls isDescendant ultimately. Okay, and isDescendant is the function from this private module. So I'm starting to think probably we can convert all these tests to instead use a more public API, which there's like the contains query in elm-html-test. Let's pull up the docs for the Elm 18 version of elm-html-test. Yeah, so there's this contains query, and great, they have an example here where they start with some HTML, they prepare it for elm-html-test, then use query.contains to check that these siblings exist somewhere in the HTML. So I think we can just probably every test in here is descendant. We can just convert to take the HTML and use query contains with the specified sub-element. And I think that should be equivalent. Let's just see if we can do that. So this is basically gonna give us an expectation. Let's see, I'm actually gonna do a little refactoring first. So let's undo this initial change and make sure our tests all pass. Great, okay. So now, first thing I want to do is change wrapper to, instead of returning a bool, oh, I see. Okay. So there's kind of two things. Sometimes we expect that it's false, and sometimes we expect that it's true. I see why they have it return a bool. Okay, so in that case, like query contains gives an expectation, but it is possible to turn an expectation into a bool. So let's try rewriting this then. So we're going to get rid of that with the goal of getting rid of this import, which if we do that, then we can safely remove it from this exposed modules list. And instead, we are going to kind of follow this example here. Take the HTML, do query contains on it with the sub-element. So we've got our base HTML. We will do query.fromHTML, query.contains, and okay, looks like this takes HTML values directly. We don't need to use this query from HTML on them. So then this should contain the potential descendant And then here we need something that's going to convert the expectation to bool. So I guess I can just put that in, and then we will need to define this. Expectation equals, and let's just return false for the moment. This takes an expectation and gives a bool. We can actually define this top level and put it down here with our helper functions. And this will be to do. We need to implement that correctly. But I want to make sure this compiles. And I think this will run. And it should fail because we're just always returning false. An expectation comes from the expect module. I usually prefer not exposing things and referring to it by the qualified name, but expectation is a common enough thing in test files that I usually just expose it. Okay, and we got some failures, presumably because we haven't implemented this function correctly. And this is just some past knowledge I happen to know. Elm test, or Elm Explorations? Is that the right module name? I am kind of blanking. Yeah, okay, that's it. And we can just find that on GitHub. All right, so I happen to know that the way we can get information out of the expectation is in this runner.failure module. Oh no, just the runner module. Yeah, okay, so we can get failure reason, and this returns nothing if the expectation is passing, and it returns a just value if the expectation is failing. So we're gonna destructure that maybe, and we're gonna be calling, this is test.runner.getFailureReason on the expectation. And if it's nothing, that means the test passes, which means we want to return a bool. I feel like the name of this function is not the greatest because it doesn't say what the bool means. So let's call it isPassing. And if we have a just with a failure reason, that means the expectation failed, and we're going to return false. All right. So, and we did not import this. Import. So we're working towards this. This should be a safe one-to-one refactoring. So we're looking for all these tests to be passing again. Great, and it looks like they pass. Just to be safe, we should verify that this test still covers the real problem. So we should go and try to break HTML descendant. And okay, so if we just change this true to false, we should get some test failures to really verify that our refactoring didn't just break the tests in a way that always passes. Okay, cool. So that failed a bunch of stuff. And I feel like that is a safe refactoring. And we have accomplished our goal here of basically removing isDescendant and instead calling a higher level API, which means we can remove this import, which means now there are no tests that try to directly import this, and this is also a module we don't want to publish, so we can remove it from here and everything should still pass. Perfect. Okay, so that one went pretty quickly. So I'm going to commit this and then see what we can do about renaming this test. Actually, I feel like we should probably just take these tests and merge them into probably the query tests, because this is now checking stuff about query contains. So I think rather than renaming this, we're just going to find a place to move these tests into. But let's commit first, and then we'll do that. And before we commit, I'm curious about what this is. HTML to Elm, what does this do? This takes HTML and gives elm-html. I'm realizing we shouldn't, I feel like we shouldn't be needing this. Oh yeah, okay, so this is totally unused. Potential HTML. Okay, that's unused. And this is also, whoops, elm-html is also unused. Oh yeah, okay. So we just use these parameters directly now instead of having to convert them. So that goes away. The let block is unneeded. And now this function is also unused. Cool. Okay, so that's just part of this refactoring because we had unused stuff. So let's commit here. Okay, that all looks good. That looks good, and this looks good. Let's see, what did we call this last time? Removed, okay. So here we removed test HTML descendant from the exposed modules. Great. I want to try doing another small refactoring here. I feel like this is going to make the code a little cleaner if we inline some title, which is used in 6 places, but it's like a really straightforward thing. Like I feel like, and also given the name, it's pretty generic. So even though this is technically removing code duplication, I feel like this doesn't really represent a coherent enough concept, or at least a concept that's really relevant to the point of the tests. So I'm going to try just inlining it and see how that looks. Maybe it'll look worse, but I think it's worth trying. And same thing here. And same thing here. And kill that. Okay, that should still pass. Then let's see, is there more refactoring we can do? So this is used in 2 places. I'm going to try this just tentatively to see how it looks. Okay, so that's kind of the end result of inlining a bunch of stuff. I think personally I like this better. It's more concise. I guess the one problem here is wrapper is still not a great name. So maybe we could refactor that also. And I'm thinking if we swap the order of these arguments, we could have like our main HTML, then we have, let's see, this would be called does contain, and then the child thing. So then we'd basically change wrapper to be called does contain, and we'd have to swap the arguments. Yeah. Yeah, what do you all, does anyone in the chat feel strongly about this one way or the other? I feel like having the test this way is more readable. Like there's more duplication technically here, but I feel like this is more readable than this whole block and having like other functions declared externally. It's also more concise, and personally I feel like in tests it's often useful to be more explicit in your test examples rather than trying to dry everything up. So yeah, if anyone is feeling strongly against that, speak up while I go through the rest of these. And let's see. So we'll start with this HTML. We will take this, stick it in twice, then we are checking does contain this, and then our expect equal. Okay. Yeah, I feel like if you read this, you can still tell that this is the same as this, even though there's no variable there. Okay, and then the same thing here for a more deeply nested thing. And then we are piping to does contain. Boop. Great. And then finally, we are taking this, we are checking does it contain image, and it should not. Great. Okay. Personally, I think that's a good refactoring, and is also nice because it doesn't depend on more top-level definitions. So when we do our next step of moving these to the queries test, I think that'll be a bit cleaner once it's there also. So let's say simplify descendant tests. And we need to stage this, stage all that, just scroll through. Great, I think that looks good. Okay, for our final step on this file, we are going to combine this file into query tests, is my thought here. Let's even see if we have stuff about contains. Yeah, it looks like there is stuff about contains already in here. Find all, query.contains. Okay, these are just in find and find all. Okay. I guess let's just add it here then. Describe query.contains. And we will grab all of these. And we do need a couple helpers. We need this. This I feel like is specific enough to this describe that I'm just going to put it in a let block here rather than at the top level, because this helper is really only for the stuff in this describe. And then this can just go down at the bottom. And then descendant can go away. And then also, because of our unusual test setup in this project, we also need to remove it from here. Descendant. Great. Okay. So these should all pass. And, oh, okay, we need to fix up some of the imports. Where is HTML? So we have li, img, it's needing, and h1. And expectation itself, expectation. Okay, so now these should pass. And we also need to import test.runner. Yeah, I'm used to doing Java development where you could combine classes and it would just automatically merge all the imports for you. Let's see. The argument to h1. Okay. In text, there's a text in the selectors in the selector module. So this we will need to change to html.text. For all of these contains queries, which is these HTML text. Okay, and that looks fine. Great, so that passes, and let's do a quick double check just to try to break this and make sure the tests still fail when the code is broken. I think the last time we did this there were 7 failures. Yeah, okay, 7 failures again. So that looks like we didn't lose any coverage. I mean, the refactorings we did were kind of trivial, so I wasn't expecting that, but I like to be in the habit of checking. All right, and then now we can add this. We've removed all of these, removed this, and we've basically removed this badly named test module and put the tests in the appropriate place. Move descendant tests to, to test HTML query tests. Great. Okay, so that's our first item. We've got 2 more modules to kind of go through, just like we did there, and refactor the tests to use the public API instead of having them test these private APIs. And then we're down to the last few chores. So let's see, I feel like this is a good time to take a quick break. So I'm going to do that, refill my water, and be back in a couple minutes. And yeah, in the meantime, if anybody else is working on interesting projects today or has any questions about the stuff we're doing, feel free to ask in the chat while we're on break. All right, see you all in a couple minutes.